Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to our next lecture for Athena, Goddess of War and Strategy. Today, we're going to dive into triggers and disarming our triggers. Doesn't that sound like fun? So we've been going through many topics that might kind of spiral around this one. We've talked a lot about that inner gravity, starting from the very first few lectures, finding that place within us that feels like me, that feels empowered and sovereign in my own energy field. We've talked about this noticing expansion and contraction of energy around us with people, places, things, food. We've also talked about conscious driving, meaning that we have several parts to our psyche that are working at one time. We want to try our best to keep that conscious, responsive higher self in the driver's seat, not the child or the teenager, or the shadow, or the shame body. So today we're going to get into disarming these triggers even more and noticing how exactly to do that. So when you're ready, grab a seat. Now it's all fine and dandy to talk about inner gravity and being in that beautiful silence and stillness so we can contact our guides and angels, and to understand there's several people driving my car, and it's quite another to experience that moment when all of that goes out the window and you find yourself embodied by this angry, shadowy, screaming person. And you're like, what the hell just happened? I thought I was all together and I just lost my shit. That is a trigger. So it's important to notice, there's a couple nice quotes here that tell us about what triggers might look like. So I love that one on the right there that says, if you never heal from what hurt you, you'll bleed all over people that didn't cut you. All right. This is so beautiful for triggers because triggers are old wounds that have not healed that show up in the present moment in a very explosive way. Right? Or your wound is probably not your fault. Truth, 100%. But your healing is your responsibility. So when we take these two quotes, we're going to get into talking about what to do about our triggers and how to heal them better. So what is a trigger? Everyone knows what a trigger is. Well, let's just define it because, like Aristotle said, stop and define your terms. So a trigger is an emotional reaction disproportionate to a given situation. Right? It's a button, an emotional button that's pushed by something in the outer world that opens a door to repressed shadow energy. It's almost like something in the world opened that basement door and that inner child, that inner shadow, whatever you want to call it, races up to the top of the stairs and jumps out screaming at the top of her lungs, and everyone says, "Who's that?" You know? Ever have that sensation in your life where you reacted and you're like, who was that? That wasn't my formed ego, my persona that I want to craft and show the world. Right? So the triggers are an unknown wound to us often. They're something we don't always have conscious awareness of. And they're also a blessing because they help us see ourselves better. Right? So every time someone triggers you, instead of blaming them, you should be thanking them. Thank you for triggering me. I see myself more clearly now, right? So examples of some triggers are, let's talk about relationship dynamics a little bit before we get to Aphrodite, because we're going to go there. But let's say that somebody is in a partnership and this person comes home late several times, doesn't call, and the person who's at home says, well, you're late. And a conscious person that doesn't have this trigger is going to say, well, I wish you would have called and let me know you were going to be home late. I just wanted you to be safe. Right? That's a normal reaction to someone being late. You're a little frustrated, but you communicate and it ends up very neutral. Right? Versus somebody showing up late and saying, oh, you're late? What are you, cheating on me? And behind that statement is all of this insecurity and fear and rage. Right? So that can tell, that's the difference between a conscious response and a trigger. So when we're triggered, we really can't see very clearly because our lens from the past kind of cloaks the present moment, blurs everything that's happening into our past story. Which is why this is happening in the Athena section, because Athena is all about cultivating that higher mind, that crystal clear mind of strategy, mental body awareness. So we need to sometimes clean that lens, and the way we clean that lens totally is to deal with these triggered emotions that we carry within us. All right, so I like to say there's a trigger triad. And I've seen this a lot in myself and other people. So triggers are repressed pain waiting to be healed. Okay, it's that shadow stuff that's in the basement that's hurting, right? It's in pain. It's not negative or demonic or bad. It's just neglected energy. Okay? So people, when they are triggered, tend to have only a few reactions. This explosion of emotional energy, like a volcano exploding when someone pushes that button on you, can be about 3 emotions. Usually it's anger. Okay, and that can, anger has many shades. It can be rage, frustration, passive aggressiveness. It can be anything that is that, but it's really anger that you feel in your body when you're triggered. That's what you feel. Rage and anger. Some people feel fear. Okay, fear. This is a fight-flight response that's going off in the body of this repressed energy. So we're going to feel scared or fearless, depending on how you deal with fear. You might get defensive and angry and agitated and, very aggressive. So again, kind of blending that fear with anger and rage. Or I've seen people spiral between that prideful, I'm right self, you're wrong, getting into that hyper dominant sense of almost narcissistic. But underneath that, it kind of spirals into victimhood too. So these are the 3 tends to be patterns of the trigger. So ask yourself, which one are you? How do you know when you're triggered? Which one of these emotional patterns rises in you? Right, it could be many, but usually we have a dominant one. Because again, this is our survival strategy that we've cultivated. The way we express our pain is a survival strategy. Some people might get really prideful and angry and aggressive and warrior-like in their stance, and yet it's still that really hot energy of inflammation, of pressure that's exploding. Okay, it's not really consistent with what's happening in the situation at hand. Disproportionate to the situation, that's a trigger. So then when we move through our triggers, we have all these stories that we tell ourselves about why we're like this, why I'm angry, why I'm prideful, why I'm scared. Someone left me when I was young, that's why I'm scared you came home late and you were cheating on me. I feel emotionally neglected when I was little, all these things. I feel angry because I want your respect, I deserve respect. You can hear yourself sometimes in these talks. All right? It's right to call someone when you're going to be late. That's disrespectful. You can hear all these stories that you have around these emotions. Okay, but when we take it all the way down past the story, past the volcanic explosion of the trigger, what we see here is really only 2 things happening. There is pain. There's pain. And that pain is grief. Underneath that grief and pain is love, the need for love. So we can simplify this so much by saying, if you are ever triggered, instead of going through all the emotional waves of rage and all that shit through the story, just go, holy shit, I really need love right now. I'm really hurting right now. And the only person who can love me, because this is my basement that I need to deal with, my wound, is me. In other words, I am the common denominator. So this happens to people a lot, where they might have the same pattern show up in many relationships. They might find that they date the same person over and over, or they might find that their friendships are the same as the ones with their parents, or something like that. So you are the common denominator. You are carrying this frequency, this wound frequency within your field. So of course, by the law of attraction, you attract situations and people too that are going to help you see this wound, or hold a mirror up to you and say, hey, do you see this? Do you see this as something you need to look at and work on and heal? Not because I don't love you, but because I do love you. I'm going to show you your trigger. I'm going to show you your wounding. That's what soulmates do. So I love these pictures in order because they're great. So triggers often mirror our own core or self-wounding that we need to work with, okay? So for instance, if you're saying to somebody, you make me feel ugly, disrespected, and I'm angry, the truth is that you might feel ugly and unworthy and disrespected or not worthy of respect. Or maybe you haven't created healthy boundaries in your life. So yeah, you keep finding people that make you feel ugly, disrespected, and make you angry. Because the pain of you not loving yourself and feeling beautiful in your own worth and respecting yourself enough to have boundaries with other people has never been cultivated. All right, so this little girl here falls off her bike and no one came to help her. And she's like, shit, I gotta do everything myself. No one cares about me. So she grows up with this defensive mindset and she becomes this very successful businesswoman. I have to do everything myself, right? We've heard about this in that oral structure. And then one day she gets really rageful at her husband or wife because he or she did something wrong. How could you emotionally neglect me? Don't you see how much I've done in the world? Don't you see how successful I am? All right, you see how this is the trigger pattern playing out in relationship. When really, we need to go way back to that little girl who fell off her bike, skinned her knee, and no one was there to help her, and she was scared and alone and wanted someone to comfort her. And since we can't bring our partners back in time with us, we're the ones that have to go back in time and help that little one. So, first thing to do, I would say, is to know your trigger pattern. Get familiar with it. Know thyself, okay? So self-study. Yoga, the Upanishads and the Yamas and Niyamas are going to give you a detailed description of how to do this, to know yourself, right? Self-study. But for this purpose, noticing what sort of situations trigger you. And if you don't know, just start paying more attention, start observing more. Is it social settings? Is it spending too much time alone with your own thoughts, noticing what's there? Or is it a certain type of person that triggers you? And I'll tell you, the ones that trigger us the most are most likely helping us see our undigested wounds from our parents. All right. Noticing what dominant emotion arises for you when the trigger's present. What explodes in you? What races out of the basement and screams? Anger, fear, insecurity, grief, pride. What is it? I love these little pictures because what situations trigger you? I think for many of us, there can be a lot of different ones that trigger the same wound. Okay, like feeling not good enough, having that shame body really rule in the show, feeling scared. Food can trigger you. Sitting down to a meal can trigger you if you're working on body image to try to heal that self-love problem. Mirrors can trigger you, right? The way someone looks at you in a grocery store can trigger you. Okay, but you see, it all comes down to this wound that I don't feel good enough. I'm broken, which is probably the biggest trigger of all. All right? I'm not good enough. So just noticing where you're triggered in life, feeling that insecurity, that pattern, that commonality for you. And I always say it's fun to name your triggered self. Just like we named our amygdala when we were talking about some beginning trauma stuff in Artemis. What do you call your amygdala, the part of you that gets real scared? What do you call your triggered self? And how does she act? And of course, remembering that she is holographically driving from the past. She's not in the present moment, okay? So when we're triggered, we notice what eruption we have. And then we start to do the healing work. We start to switch drivers, as we've said before. So how do we do that? Again, we stop and we calm our nervous system with 3 LSD breaths. Again, those LSD breaths and hopefully breathing into all 5 chambers of the pranic field that we've talked about will start to give you this presence. Even if you're still charged up from what's happening, you'll have a little bit of presence in your body from the weight of that breath. All right, I want you to admit, I'm triggered. You can even say it out loud. I'm triggered. I'm feeling anger, fear, like I want to escape, whatever it is. Like I need to be bigger right now, that I need to defend myself. Notice how you act and express it. And then I want you to go a little further and say, what story am I telling myself right now? If you're that girl who's waiting home and someone's coming in late and you feel triggered, it's the story you're telling yourself that you're not good enough, and of course they're cheating on you. Okay, what's the story? Noticing if I've experienced this story before. Yeah, when I was little, I fell and I scraped my knee and nobody came to help me because everyone else was busy. And because everybody else was busy, I got the signal that I'm not important. I'm not good enough. Okay? So yeah, I've experienced this before, and I notice how old this wound is. This wound is 5 or 6 years old, even though she's ruling my car at 40, right? It's pretty trippy. How did my 5-year-old get in the driver's seat, and how does she know how to drive? The fact is, she doesn't know how to drive. That's why we need to do this work. So solutions to our triggers, it really comes down to healing it ourselves. It doesn't matter how many people love you in the world if you don't love yourself. Okay, we've been in this conversation before. You're an open drain, right? All this goodness just pours over you. All this love and affection that other people give you from the outside in pours over you and goes right down the drain. And as soon as they stop giving you affection and love, you get triggered because you feel empty, right? Because we haven't plugged the drain yet. So this is how we plug the drain and fill that bathtub up with this beautiful, loving essence that we can soak in anytime we want. And we can clean ourselves in whenever we want. We don't rely on other people to keep us safe and healthy. We do it for ourselves, and then we reflect that energy out to create a bountiful life. So if we see this cave here, notice going into this cave and being like, oh my God, what's in there? This is kind of what we have to do for our triggers. We have to go through the story into those emotional spaces that are painful. We got to lean into the cave, so to speak, lean into those parts within us that feel scary that we don't want to go to. And when we come out the other side, we find freedom there. Just like, can you imagine going through that cave and coming out to see this beautiful forest? Yeah, that's what it's like when we heal these deep wounds of ourselves. So I always say that the best work happens in silence, and we've talked about this. Stillness and silence are a major, major tool of this work. So every night, if you wish, for a week or a few days, or when you need to, put on your schedule at least once a week to go into this meditation and move through your day and review what happened. Notice if you were triggered about anything. All right? And then we're going to lean into that sensation. And what I mean by that is lean into the body and notice where it's stuck in the body. Notice where the breath is having a hard time going. Right? Notice what feels numb, disconnected, heavy. And we stretch into that, like pushing into a membrane of sorts. And we feel what's there. And we feel it some more. And we keep feeling and breathing and being focused in that region until we dissolve through it and let that emotional release come. Self-care and self-reflection. That's what that is. Then, when we've done enough of this dissolving of our triggers, of this pain that we have inside, then we are free to really respond. Because there isn't that pressure anymore of this shadow needing to fix itself, to find more light. See, the shadow, the shame body, only activates because it's really craving to be a part of the whole. Right? It wants to be loved. Again, the shadow, the shame body is not evil. It's just a part of us that we need to love more. Okay, we need to become friends with it. So that's it. Thank you for triggering me so I can know myself, so I can love myself and be happy. And we know that when the situation has not changed, but how we react to that situation has, then healing is happening. So again, look at your list of things that trigger you and just make a note of that, because if you do this work for the next week or so, you might find that there's more presence in you and more Athena in you, more strategy and self-loyalty and love, and that the little things don't bug you as much. It kind of rolls off your back. Right? So after this lecture, please go ahead and listen to the trigger meditation. You're welcome to do it every night or when you have those bad days or whenever you wish, but please practice. Practice building that muscle of conscious awareness versus that very strong muscle of conditioning. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful evening or day. I'll see you next time. Namaste.